Daniel Carter stood near the tall windows of the royal palace and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. He had been on the planet Prime for 6 months now, working as a diplomatic aide for the human embassy. The job was quiet most days. He attended meetings, wrote reports, and tried not to offend anyone. They were not easy to understand. They were tall creatures that looked like graceful mantises with wings that shimmered in the light. Their bodies were covered in dark violet shells, and their eyes held thousands of years of history. They had ruled this part of the galaxy long before humans ever left Earth. Tonight was a celebration. The Queen's 7 daughters were leaving for a sacred pilgrimage to the moon of. It was an ancient tradition, one that happened only once every 100 years. The entire court had gathered to see them off. Daniel watched the princesses walk through the great hall. They moved with the same grace as their mother, their wings folded neatly against their backs. The youngest looked nervous. The oldest carried herself with quiet confidence. They were beautiful in a way that was hard to describe, like watching art come to life. Queen sat on her throne at the far end of the hall. She was ancient, older than any human could imagine, but she did not look weak. Power radiated from her like heat from a fire. Her eyes followed her daughters as they walked toward the transport ship that would carry them too. Daniel felt a strange sadness as he watched. He had lost his own sister years ago in an accident. He knew what it meant to watch someone you love walk away, even if they promised to come back. The princesses boarded their ship. The crowd cheered. The queen raised one elegant hand in farewell, and then they were gone, rising into the darkening sky until they became just another star among millions. The celebration continued for several hours. Daniel stayed near the edges of the room, sipping a drink he could not pronounce and trying to look like he belonged. He was about to leave when the alarm started. The sound cut through the music like a knife. Red lights flashed across the ceiling. Guards rushed into the hall with weapons drawn. The guests began to panic, pushing toward the exits. Daniel stood frozen. He had never heard alarms in the palace before. A messenger burst through the main doors and ran straight to the throne. He fell to his knees before the queen and spoke in rapid. Daniel could not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Something terrible had happened. The queen rose slowly from her throne. Her face did not change, but her hands began to shake. She asked a question. The messenger answered, and then the queen made a sound that Daniel would never forget. It was not a scream. It was something deeper, something that seemed to come from the very core of her being. A sound of pure grief that echoed through the hall and silenced everyone. The princesses were gone, all 7 of them. Their ship had been attacked on the sacred moon. The royal guards who had been protecting them were dead. There were no survivors. Daniel watched the queen collapse back onto her throne. For a moment, she looked like what she truly was, an old mother who had just lost all her children. The hall erupted in chaos. Advisors shouted at each other. Guards ran in every direction. Someone was crying, someone else was giving orders, but Daniel could not look away from the queen. He thought about his sister. He thought about the day he got the call. He thought about how the world had kept spinning even though his had stopped. Without thinking, Daniel walked toward the throne. Guards moved to stop him, but he held up his hands to show he meant no harm. He did not try to touch the queen or offer empty words. He simply stood before her and bowed his head. The queen looked at him. Her ancient eyes, usually so cold and distant, were wet with tears she refused to let fall. Daniel spoke quietly. "I am sorry for your loss, Your Majesty. I know those words mean nothing right now, but I wanted you to know that someone sees your pain." The queen stared at him for a long moment. Around them, the chaos continued. Advisors demanded her attention. Guards waited for orders, but she kept her eyes on the human standing before her. "You are the one from the Earth Embassy," she said. Her voice was steady but barely. "Yes, Your Majesty." Why do you stand here when everyone else runs? Daniel thought about the question, because no one should be alone when they receive news like this, not even a queen. Something shifted in her eyes. It was small, just a flicker, but Daniel saw it. For one brief moment, the wall between them came down. "Leave me," the queen said to the room. "All of you now." The advisors protested. The guards hesitated. But one look from the queen silenced them all. Within minutes, the great hall was empty except for Daniel and the queen. She stood and walked toward him. Up close, she was even more imposing. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, and her presence made the air feel heavy. "You are a strange creature," she said. "Your kind has been in the galaxy for such a short time. You know nothing of our ways, and yet you showed me more kindness in one moment than my own court has in centuries." Daniel did not know what to say, so he said nothing. The queen studied him with those ancient eyes. "Come with me, human. I wish to speak with you privately." She turned and walked toward a door behind the throne. Daniel followed, not knowing that his life was about to change forever. The queen's private chambers were nothing like Daniel expected. He had imagined gold and jewels and displays of power. Instead, he found a simple room with soft lighting and walls covered in paintings. The paintings showed 7 young at different ages, from tiny hatchlings to the grown princesses he had seen just hours ago. Queen walked to a window and stared out at the night sky. Daniel stood near the door, unsure if he should speak or wait. "I have ruled this empire for 3,000 years, the queen said finally. "I have survived wars, plagues, and betrayals. I watched my mate die in my arms 500 years ago. I thought I knew what pain felt like." She turned to face Daniel. "I was wrong. Your Majesty, I cannot imagine what you are feeling right now." "No, you cannot, but you tried. That is more than anyone else did tonight." She moved to a chair and sat down heavily. "The attack was not random. Someone told the syndicate exactly when and where my daughters would be. Someone in my own court." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "A traitor." "Yes, and until I find them I cannot trust anyone. Not my guards, not my advisors, not even the servants who bring my food." The queen looked at him with an expression he could not read. "But I can trust you." "Me, your Majesty, I am just a human, a nobody from a species that has barely left its home planet." "Exactly. You have no power here. You have no connections to the noble families. You have nothing to gain from my death." She leaned forward. "I want you to be my guardian, Daniel Carter. I want you to protect me until the traitor is found." Daniel's heart stopped for a moment. "I am not a soldier. I do not know how to fight." "I have soldiers. What I need is someone who can see things they cannot, someone who will watch the shadows while they watch the doors." The queen stood and walked toward him. "You saw my pain tonight when everyone else saw only a queen. That tells me you see more than most." Before Daniel could answer, the door opened and a tall swept into the room. He wore robes of deep red and carried himself like someone who expected others to move out of his way. "Your Majesty, I heard you dismiss the court. This is highly unusual, especially at a time like this. We must discuss the response to this attack." His eyes landed on Daniel and narrowed with disgust. "Why is this human here, in your private chambers?" "High Advisor, I did not summon you," the queen said coldly. "I came because I am concerned for your safety. There is a traitor in our midst, and you have sent away all your guards to speak alone with an alien." Moved closer, placing himself between Daniel and the queen. "This is not wise." "I will decide what is wise. Leave us." Did not move. "Your Majesty, with respect, you are not thinking clearly. The grief has clouded your judgment. Let me handle the search for the traitor. Let me protect you." Something in his voice made Daniel uneasy. It was too smooth, too practiced, like he had been waiting for this moment. The queen must have sensed it too, because her expression hardened. "I said leave, now." The High Advisor bowed stiffly and walked out. But before he closed the door, He shot Daniel a look filled with pure hatred. "He does not like me," Daniel said. "Does not like anyone he cannot control. He has served me for 200 years and has always wanted more power." The Queen returned to her chair. "Do you accept my offer, Daniel Carter?" Daniel thought about his quiet life at the embassy. He thought about the reports and meetings and boring dinners. Then he thought about the Queen standing alone in that hall, surrounded by chaos, with no one to comfort her. "Yes," he said, "I accept." Over the next few days, Daniel moved into quarters near the Queen's chambers. He learned the layout of the palace. He studied the faces of servants and guards. He listened to conversations and watched how people behaved when they thought no one was looking. Ambassador Lisa Grant called him to her office on the third day. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she asked. Her voice was sharp with worry. "You are a diplomatic aide, not a bodyguard. If something happens to the Queen while you are protecting her, it could destroy relations between Earth and the Empire." "I understand the risk, Ambassador." "Do you? Because I do not think you do. The court is a snake pit. They have been playing politics for thousands of years. You have been playing for 3 days." Lisa sighed. "I cannot order you to stop, but please be careful." Daniel promised he would. He was not sure he could keep that promise. That night he stood beside the Queen during a council meeting. The advisors argued about how to respond to the attack. Some wanted war against the syndicate. Others wanted diplomacy. Spoke the loudest, pushing for immediate military action. Daniel watched everyone. He noticed how some advisors looked at the Queen with genuine concern. He noticed how others looked at her throne with hunger in their eyes. And he noticed how kept glancing at a young advisor near the back of the room. Something was wrong. Daniel could feel it. The meeting ended. The advisors began to leave. Daniel moved to follow the Queen when he saw it. A flash of metal in the hand of the young advisor had been watching. Daniel did not think, he just moved. He threw himself at the Queen just as the advisor lunged forward with a blade. The knife meant for the Queen's back cut deep into Daniel's shoulder instead. Pain exploded through his body. He fell to the ground, pulling the Queen with him. Guards swarmed the attacker. Someone was screaming. Daniel could feel blood soaking through his shirt. But all he could focus on was the Queen's face above him, her eyes wide with shock. "You saved me," she whispered. "You could have died and you saved me." Daniel tried to smile, but darkness was creeping into the edges of his vision. "That is what guardians do," he said. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness was the Queen calling for healers, her ancient voice cracking with an emotion he had never heard from her before: fear. Daniel woke up in a bed softer than anything he had ever slept in. His shoulder burned with pain, but the wound had been sealed with some kind of blue gel that hummed faintly against his skin. Queen sat in a chair beside his bed. She looked like she had not moved in hours. "How long was I unconscious?" Daniel asked, his voice rough. 2 days, the healer said you were lucky. A few inches deeper and the blade would have reached your heart." The Queen stood and walked closer. "You nearly died protecting me, human. Why?" Daniel thought about the question. "Because you needed protecting. Because no one else was going to do it. Because—" he paused. "Because you remind me of my mother after my sister died. Strong on the outside, broken on the inside. Someone needed to stand beside her. No one did. I will not make that mistake again." The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked Daniel more than the knife had. She reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you, Daniel Carter. No one has protected me so selflessly in 1,000 years." Daniel recovered quickly. Medicine was far better than anything on Earth. Within a week, he was back on his feet, though the healers told him to be careful. He was more determined than ever to find the traitor. The young advisor who had attacked the Queen had died before he could be questioned. Someone had poisoned him in his cell. That meant the real enemy was still out there, and they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. Daniel asked the Queen for access to classified files about the attack on her daughters. She gave it without hesitation. He spent days reading through reports, looking at evidence, studying maps of the sacred moon. Something did not add up. The official report said the syndicate had found the princesses by accident, but the moon was in restricted space. No one could enter without clearance from the palace. Someone had let them in. Daniel checked the security footage from that night. Parts of it were missing, not corrupted or damaged, but carefully deleted. Someone with high-level access had erased the evidence. He contacted Commander Ben Torres, a human military officer he had served with years ago. Ben owed him a favor, and Daniel called it in. "I need you to analyze this footage," Daniel said during a private call. "Tell me if it has been tampered with." Ben examined the files and called back the next day. "It is not just tampered, Daniel. It is professionally edited. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The edits came from inside the palace, from a terminal in the High Advisor's office." Yes. Daniel was not surprised, but he needed more proof. Accusing the High Advisor of treason without solid evidence would get him killed. He needed to find someone who could confirm the connection between and the syndicate. He went to Hollow Point. The station was exactly as bad as Daniel had heard. It floated in the dark space between systems, a haven for criminals, smugglers, and people who did not want to be found. Daniel wore old clothes and left his embassy identification behind. If anyone recognized him as a human diplomat, he would not leave alive. He found a bar in the lower levels and started asking questions. Most people ignored him. A few threatened him. But eventually, someone pointed him toward a sitting alone in a dark corner. Her name was Vex. She had been a noble once, before scandal destroyed her family. Now she survived by selling information to anyone who would pay. "You want to know about thee and the princesses?" Vex laughed bitterly. "Everyone wants to know about that. The question is, what will you give me in return?" Daniel placed a bag of credits on the table. It was everything he had saved during his time on Prime. Vex counted the credits and smiled. They did not plan that attack themselves. They were hired. Someone paid them a fortune to take the princesses. Who? The payment came through special accounts, hidden accounts, but I have friends who can trace such things. Vex leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. The money came from High Advisor. Daniel felt his blood run cold. "Can you prove it?" "I can give you the account numbers and the transaction records. What you do with them is your business." Vex handed him a small data chip. "Be careful, human. Has eyes everywhere. If he finds out what you know, you will end up like those guards dead and forgotten." Daniel returned to the palace with the evidence hidden in his boot. He went straight to the Queen and showed her everything. The edited footage, the traced payments, the connection to. The Queen listened in silence. When Daniel finished, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I have known for 200 years. I trusted him with my empire." Her voice was steady, but Daniel could hear the pain underneath. "And he murdered my daughters." "We do not know if they are dead, Your Majesty. The bodies were never found. Vex said they were taken, not killed." The Queen's eyes snapped open. Taken where?" "I do not know yet, but if they are alive, we can find them." Hope flickered in the Queen's ancient eyes. It was fragile and small, but it was there. "What do you suggest?" she asked. "We set a trap. We think you are vulnerable. We give him a chance to strike again. And when he does, we catch him." The Queen nodded slowly. "Then let us begin." Queen announced her pilgrimage 3 days later. She would travel to the moon to honor her daughters at the place where they had vanished. The court was shocked. Some called it brave, others called it foolish, called it destiny. Daniel watched the High Advisor carefully during the announcement, kept his face calm, but his eyes betrayed him. There was excitement there, hidden beneath layers of false concern. He was already planning the attack. Daniel assembled a team in secret. Commander Ben Torres arrived with 4 of his best soldiers. The Queen handpicked a dozen guards who had served her for centuries, warriors whose loyalty had never wavered. Together, they planned every detail of the trap. The pilgrimage ship left Prime on a cold morning. The Queen sat in her private quarters, silent and still. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip. "Are you afraid?" the Queen asked. "Yes," Daniel admitted, "but fear keeps you alive, it makes you sharp. Humans are strange creatures. You live such short lives, yet you throw yourselves into danger without hesitation. I have never understood it." Daniel smiled. "Maybe because we know our time is limited. We cannot afford to wait for the perfect moment. We have to act now or not at all." The ship landed on near the ancient temple where the princesses had been taken. The ruins rose from the rocky ground like broken teeth, worn by time and forgotten by most of the galaxy. Daniel led the way into the temple, his team spreading out behind him. The Queen followed, her royal guards forming a protective circle around her. They did not have to wait long. They attacked from the shadows. They poured out of hidden passages, their weapons blazing with energy, but Daniel's team was ready. The battle was fierce. Energy bolts lit up the darkness. Soldiers fell on both sides. Daniel fought his way through the chaos, searching for the leader of the assassins. He found him near the center of the temple, a massive with scars covering his face. They clashed in a fight that seemed to last forever. Daniel was smaller and weaker, but he was faster. He ducked under a killing blow and drove his blade into his chest. The assassin fell. Daniel stood over him, breathing hard. "Who hired you?" Daniel demanded. "Tell me, and I will let you die quickly." The laughed, blood bubbling from his lips. "You already know who hired us, human. The High Advisor. He wanted the Queen dead and the princesses sold to the highest bidder." "Sold? Where are they?" "The slave facility in the asteroid belt. But you will never reach them. We'll make sure of that." The assassin died with a smile on his face. Daniel returned to the Queen with the news. Her reaction was not grief this time. It was fury. "My daughters are alive. They have been slaves for months while smiled at me in my own court." Her voice was like ice. "Take me back to Prime, now." The return journey was tense. Word had already spread that the Queen had survived another attack. By the time they reached the palace, the court was gathered in the throne room, waiting. Stood at the front, his face arranged in an expression of relief. "Your Majesty, thank the ancestors you are safe. We feared the worst when we heard about the attack." The Queen walked past him without a word. She climbed the steps to her throne and turned to face the court. "High Advisor," she said, her voice carrying through the silent room. "You are accused of treason against the throne. You are accused of hearing the syndicate to murder my daughters and sell them into slavery. You are accused of plotting my assassination." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Its mask of calm finally cracked. "This is absurd. Your Majesty, you cannot believe these lies. The human has poisoned your mind against me." Daniel stepped forward and held up the data chip. "I have evidence. Transaction records showing payments from your personal accounts to the syndicate, security footage edited from your office terminal, and a dying confession from the assassin you hired." Looked around the room, searching for allies, but the other advisors were backing away from him. No one wanted to be associated with a traitor. "You cannot do this," snarled. "I have served this empire for 200 years. I have." "You have betrayed everything you swore to protect," the Queen interrupted. "Guards seize him." Tried to run. He made it 3 steps before the Crimson Veil caught him. They dragged him back before the throne, forcing him to his knees. The Queen rose from her seat and walked down the steps until she stood directly in front of him. "For your crimes against the royal blood, I sentence you to the silence. You will be sealed in crystal for eternity, alive and aware, unable to move or speak or die. May you spend forever thinking about what you have done," screamed as the guards dragged him away. The sound echoed through the palace long after he was gone. The queen turned to Daniel. The fury in her eyes had faded, replaced by something else, something desperate. "My daughters are in the belt. Will you help me bring them home?" Daniel did not hesitate. "I will not rest until your family is together again." The queen nodded, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. The rescue fleet gathered in secret. 3 warships and 2 human cruisers formed the strike force. It was the first joint military operation between the 2 species in history. Daniel stood on the bridge of the flagship beside Queen. She had insisted on coming despite the danger. No one argued with her. "The facility is hidden inside one of the larger asteroids," Commander Ben Torres explained, pointing at the tactical display. "Heavy defenses, multiple gun platforms, and a garrison of at least 200 soldiers. This will not be easy." "Easy does not matter," the Queen said. "Only success matters." Daniel had assembled the ground team personally. 20 warriors, 10 human soldiers, and a medic named Marsh who had volunteered the moment she heard about the mission. "I grew up reading stories about rescuing princesses," had told him with a grin. "Never thought I would actually get to do it." The fleet jumped to the belt and found the facility exactly where intelligence said it would be. They were not expecting an attack. Their defenses were strong but unprepared. The battle in space was short and brutal. The warships tore through the gun platforms while the human cruisers disabled the station's shields. Within an hour, the way was clear. Daniel led the ground team through the docking bay and into the facility. They fought hard, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Room by room, corridor by corridor, Daniel's team pushed deeper into the asteroid. The slave pens were in the lowest level. Daniel had seen many terrible things during his career, but nothing prepared him for what he found there. Hundreds of prisoners from dozens of species were crammed into tiny cells. They looked at Daniel with eyes that had forgotten hope. Most of them did not even react when the cell doors opened. "Search every cell," Daniel ordered. "Find the princesses." It took 20 minutes. Marsh found them first. "Daniel, over here." He ran to a room at the far end of the level. 7 stasis pods lined the walls, each one containing a princess. They were suspended in blue fluid, their eyes closed, their bodies still. Daniel's hands shook as he started the release sequence. One by one, the pods opened. One by one, the princesses emerged, confused and terrified. The youngest was barely larger than a human child. She stumbled out of her pod and fell to her knees, too weak to stand. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground. "It is okay," he said softly. "You are safe now. I am taking you home." She looked up at him with wide eyes. "Who are you?" "My name is Daniel. I'm a friend of your mother." "Mother?" The words seemed to break something inside her. She started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel held her close and let her weep against his shoulder. Marsh moved through the room, checking each princess for injuries. They were weak and malnourished, but they were alive. They were all alive. Daniel carried the youngest princess out of the facility himself. The other 6 walked behind him, supported by soldiers and medics. They emerged from the asteroid to find the Queen waiting in the docking bay. For a moment, no one moved. The Queen stood frozen, staring at her daughters as if she could not believe they were real. The princesses stared back at their mother, tears streaming down their faces. Then the youngest princess broke free from Daniel's arms and ran. She crossed the docking bay in seconds and threw herself at the Queen. The Queen caught her and held her tight, falling to her knees as the other daughters rushed to join them. Daniel watched the reunion with tears in his own eyes. Around him, hardened soldiers were crying too. Even Commander Ben Torres had to turn away to compose himself. The Queen looked up at Daniel over her daughters' heads. She did not speak. She did not need to. Everything she felt was written in her eyes. Thank you. The journey home was the happiest Daniel had ever experienced. The princesses recovered quickly with proper food and care. They spent hours with their mother, talking and crying and laughing together. 3,000 years of royal dignity melted away as the queen became simply a mother again, surrounded by the children she had thought she lost forever. The youngest princess, whose name was, seemed particularly attached to Daniel. She followed him around the ship, asking endless questions about humans and Earth and his life before Prime. "You saved us," she told him one evening. "You saved our mother too. Why would you do that for strangers?" Daniel thought about the question. Because it was the right thing to do. Because your mother needed help and no one else would give it. Because sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be. "Humans are strange," said, echoing her mother's words from weeks ago. "But I like you." The fleet returned to Prime to celebrations that lasted for days. The entire empire rejoiced at the return of the princesses. Songs were written. Festivals were held. The story of the human guardian spread across the galaxy. At the final ceremony, the queen stood before her court with all 7 daughters beside her. Daniel stood in the crowd, trying to stay invisible. He had never liked attention. "Today we honor a hero," the queen announced. "A human who came to our empire as a stranger and became something more. He protected me when my own court turned against me. He found the traitor who stole my daughters. He led the mission that brought them home." She looked directly at Daniel. "Come forward, Daniel Carter." Daniel walked to the throne and knelt before the queen. The entire court watched in silence. "For your service to the crown, I name you guardian of the royal blood. You are the first non to ever hold this title. From this day forward, you are part of our family." The court exploded in applause. Daniel rose and bowed to the queen, too overwhelmed to speak. Later that night, after the celebrations ended, Daniel stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The stars shone bright above him, the same stars that had watched over this empire for thousands of years. Footsteps sounded behind him. He turned to find Princess standing in the doorway. "Will you stay?" she asked quietly. "Will you stay with us forever?" Daniel smiled and knelt down to her level. "I will stay as long as your family needs me, I promise." Hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Guardian Daniel." From the shadows, Queen watched the exchange. For the first time she felt something she had forgotten existed. Hope. The galaxy was vast and dangerous. There would be new threats, new enemies, new challenges. But the Empire had something it had never had before, a human who would stand beside them through anything. And Daniel Carter, the quiet diplomat who had once spent his days writing reports, had found something too. A purpose, a family, a home among the stars. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Whatever came next, they would face it together.